The United States lacked an executive branch and the system of national courts. The Confederation of the United States was not strong enough to govern the new nations. The government could not regulate trade between the states or control taxes towards the states or the citizens. The Confederation was a little more than an assembly of representatives of the independent states. In 1783, after the Revolutionary War, the nation entered a period of unstable commercial and political conditions. Alexander Hamilton and his supporters would have had little success in their campaign for a new constitution if conditions in the states were better. Each state acted almost like an independent country. Each state ran its own affairs exactly how it saw fit, with little concerns for the need of the republic. The states circulated a dozen different currencies, most of which had little value. Neighboring states taxed each other's imports. Great Britain refused to pay the debts they had assumed during the Revolutionary War. Many states passed laws that enabled the debtors to escape paying their obligations. State troops finally put down the rebellion. George Washington and other leaders wondered whether the other colonies would rebel against Great Britain in vain. In western Massachusetts in 1786, hundreds of farmers under the captain Daniel Shays rebelled against the state government because of unfair taxation on the citizens. This was known as Shays' Rebellion. State troops finally put down the rebellion. George Washington and other leaders wondered whether the other colonies would rebel against Great Britain in vain. They felt it was time to end these troubles and bring peace and order by forming a new national government. This new government would have to be strong enough to gain obedience at home and respect abroad. Representatives from 5 states met in Annapolis, Maryland in 1786. They proposed that the states appoint commissioners to meet in Philadelphia and considered revising the Articles of Confederation. Congress agreed to the proposal and suggested that each state select delegates to a constitutional convention, known as the Constitution.
On September 17, 1787, the delegates to the Constitutional Convention approved a majority of their documents which they had since May. When they all left, they got support for their charter, although still some opposed. One of the problems before the Constitution could be put to the public was that it had to go through public debate. Oddly enough, President George Washington did not participate very often in these debates. The Congress took approximately 2 days, September 26th and 27th, to look over a few more situations. The next day, the Congress told the legislatures to call ratification conventions in their states. Only 9 of the states had to ratify the Constitution for it to start. There were some who favored the ratification, which were the Federalists, and there were those who did not, which were the Anti-Federalists. Delegates had a very strong belief for a rule in majority, although at the same time they wanted to keep things fair. To do this, they separated and balanced the powers of the national government. A few other rules included the respect for individuals and states' rights, rule by the people, and national government supremacy. Congress were given the right by the delegates of the Constitutional Convention to pass any law that is necessary and proper to give powers granted by the Constitution to the President, Congress, and federal courts. Delegates gave Congress this power because they knew they couldn't write laws for every possible situation. Although many thought that the Constitution gave too much power to the central government and that a republic this large would be too much to handle for the representative government. 2/3 of each House of Congress, or by national convention called by Congress, is required for proposal of a new amendment. The Constitution adds the new amendment once it is ratified. This can be done by legislatures of 3/4 of the states or by conventions in 3/4 of the states. It's up to the Congress to decide how it is ratified and how long they take to do it. A very common choice by Congress is a 7-year time period. The Constitution consists of 27 amendments and the Bill of Rights. At first, the Constitutional Convention failed in adding a Bill of Rights, which was an idea of George Mason. Eventually, they were put in as proving to be a fix for the problem in the ratifying convention, and also the reason North Carolina ratified the Constitution. The first 9 states to approve the Constitution took about 10 months. Delaware was the first state to ratify on December 7, 1787. Pennsylvania tried to be the first to ratify it in hoping to secure the national government seat, but they did not. In June, New Hampshire was the 9th state to approve the Constitution. Another 2 states, New York and Virginia, were having problems deciding whether to approve or not. Their approval was essential considering they were both very populated and wealthy, although they did make a breakthrough and decided to approve. In 1790, Rhode Island finally chose to call for a ratifying convention even though they rejected the idea in 1788. Through time, the Constitution has changed to meet the needs of the U.S.
Less than 3 months after the Constitution was signed, Delaware became the first state to ratify it on December 7, 1787. New Hampshire was the 9th state, putting the Constitution into effect on June 21, 1788. But the Founding Fathers could not be sure that the Constitution would be generally accepted until the important states of New York and Virginia had ratified it. Powerful organized opposition to the Constitution had developed in these two states and in others. Such men as Elbridge Gerry, Patrick Henry, Richard Henry Lee, and George Mason spoke out against ratification. Critics objected that a Bill of Rights had not been included, that the president had too much independence, and that the Senate was too aristocratic. They also thought Congress had too many powers and the national government had too much authority. Friends of the Constitution rallied support for ratification. They became known as Federalists. Their opponents were called Anti-Federalists. These two groups promoted their causes in newspapers, in pamphlets, and in debates in the ratifying conventions. The groups developed into the first American political parties.
On June 25, 1788, Virginia ratified the Constitution, and on July 26, New York also did. Early in January 1789, all the ratifying states except New York, which failed to appoint electors by the deadline, selected presidential electors in their legislatures or by a direct vote of the people. On February 4th, the electors named George Washington as the first president of the United States. The first Congress under the Constitution met in New York City on March 4th. Washington was inaugurated on April 30th. But North Carolina and Rhode Island refused to approve the Constitution and take part in the new government until Congress agreed to add a Bill of Rights.
Alexander Hamilton, who later became the first Secretary of the Treasury, wrote 51 of the 85 essays in the Federalist, which defended the newly drafted Constitution and called for its ratification. The Constitution of the United States sets forth the nation's fundamental laws. It establishes the form of the national government and defines the rights and liberties of the American people.
Witnesses include John Langdon, Nicholas Gilman, Nathaniel Gorham, Rufus King, William Samuel Johnson, Roger Sherman, Alexander Hamilton, William Livingston, David Brearley, William Patterson, Jonathan Dayton, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Mifflin, Robert Morris, George Clymer, Thomas Fitzsimmons, Jared Ingersoll, James Wilson, Gouverneur Morris, George Reed, Gunning Bedford, John Dickinson, Richard Bassett, Jacob Broome, James McHenry, Daniel Carroll, John Blair, James Madison, William Blount, Richard Dobbs Speight, Hugh Williamson, John Rutledge, Charles Cottesworth, Charles Pinckney, Pierce Butler, William Few, Abraham Baldwin, William Jackson, and George Washington.